Chapter 22. Monday noonish. Doreen hoped the garbage hadn't been picked up yet, so Mac could retrieve the rest of the items she'd seen. Considering it was a weekend, chances were good it hadn't been. But if Cecily had seen Doreen taking the notes out of the trash can, then she was pretty sure someone would empty it, and fast. When Mac phoned her 20 minutes later, he confirmed her fears. "The can is empty," he said, swearing softly. "Of course it is," she said. "She probably saw me and decided to empty it herself." "We still don't know that it has anything to do with the case," he said. "No. But like you said, it was a lot of blood. So short of somebody cutting an artery, taking off a leg or something, the chances are it's related to her dead sister, a sister she was no longer happy with, who had a boyfriend, who is also dead." "You could be right," he grumbled. "But without a warrant, I can't go in and check the premises." "Would she take the contents inside? I mean, if you think about it, wouldn't she expect a warrant next? The only other thing she'd likely have done is put it in her car to dispose of elsewhere," he said. "I didn't see a car when I was there," she said. "Maybe the parking is around back." "There is a parking lot," he said. "But I haven't checked to see if any vehicles are back there." "Why don't you make a casual drive-by?" she urged. "See what vehicles there are, take the license plates down, confirm that one is hers, and then maybe I'll take a look to see where she goes." "And do what?" he scoffed. "You're back to playing amateur sleuth again. Remember how this is supposed to be left for the professionals?" "Yeah, well, the professionals didn't check the garbage can that was there when you found the body." "I'm not sure the can was out here," he said thoughtfully. "I won't know until I go back and scan the crime scene photos." "Oh, now that's an interesting twist too. What if somebody else put the cans out for pickup? And why then?" "It's hard to say. Maybe she put it out earlier, thinking it was safe. But if it's empty now, somebody emptied it." "True. I'm seeing movement inside," he said. "Bye." And he hung up. She chewed on her fingernails, worrying about it. And then she couldn't stand it anymore. She looked over at the animals. "Who wants to go for a car ride?" Thaddeus squawked, "Me, me, me." Muggs barked, and even Goliath jumped into her lap. She sighed. "I didn't really mean all of you." But she'd mentioned it, had even offered, so now she felt obliged to follow through. She didn't know when the animals became as important to her as people, or when her promises to animals became as important as her promises to people, but somehow they had. She walked out to the vehicle with her cell phone in her hand in case Mac called back, and loaded up her critters. As always, Goliath took the front passenger seat, almost daring Muggs to fight him for it, and with Thaddeus on her shoulder, Doreen drove past where she had found the body at the Family Planning Center. Interestingly enough, she couldn't see any sign of Mac's car. The garbage can was still where she'd seen it before. She drove around the building and headed into the back parking lot. It was empty also. But a small red car had just pulled out through the opposite exit, with a female driver. Doreen hadn't noticed the car until then, but as she watched, it drove to the end of the block. On a hunch, she took a right turn and followed it. She had no way to know who was behind the wheel, and of course, once again, her hunches were just blind guesses. Except that Thaddeus urged her on from her shoulder. "Thaddeus, we don't know that it's Cecily." He gave Doreen a look and tried to hop up on her steering wheel. She brushed him back off. "No, no, no." Even Goliath sat up and put his front paws on the dash. She glanced at him. "What's gotten into you two?" She looked in the rearview mirror to see Muggs looking out the side window behind her. "At least you're being normal," she joked. But then he turned to look out the front windshield, and jumped onto the armrest between the two front seats and barked. "Oh boy. That's enough of that. I can't think, let alone drive safely and deal with all of you," she muttered. She tried to get Muggs to calm down, but he wasn't having any of it. She pulled off to the side of the road. "If you guys don't stop, I'm not driving." The ruckus became 3 times louder. She hit the gas and followed the car again. It still trundled along at the normal speed limit, suspiciously so. Doreen was always 5 miles over the allowed speed limit. She couldn't imagine anybody driving spot on. But this red car seemed to be maintaining the perfect driving speed. If Doreen were driving a car filled with bloody evidence and she didn't want to get pulled over by the cops, then that's what she'd do too. As she thought about this, a vehicle pulled up behind her, too closely behind her. Thaddeus turned, squawked once, and then faced forward again. She looked in the rearview mirror. "Oh shit. Now I'm in trouble, you guys." Then she giggled. Because if Mac should have expected one thing, it was that Doreen would be in trouble, if not now, soon. She continued following the red vehicle, but she did lift a hand and give him a 3-finger wave through the rear window. She knew that would just piss him off a little more, but that was okay too. It appeared to be one of the regular things she did, without even having to think about it. Besides, it made her smile, so it couldn't be all bad. Then Mac honked a few times. The driver of the red car realized she was being followed. Whether she recognized Doreen's vehicle or Mac's, the driver put the gas pedal to the floor and whipped to the right at the next corner. Startled, Doreen almost missed the corner but caught it on a wide turn. Mac was right on her tail. But now it looked like the woman in front was desperate to get away. She drove hell-bent, taking multiple corners in succession as if trying to shake her tail, and it was all Doreen could do to keep up with her, wondering what this woman was up to exactly. For sure the woman was acting more than slightly suspicious. Finally she pulled into a massive parking lot, dashed out of the car and ran into the mall. And Doreen caught a glimpse of her. Cecily. Doreen had been right. She pulled up beside Cecily's car and parked. Only then did Doreen realize her hands were trembling. She knew Mac would rip into her for this. But at the same time, she needed to know what the hell the woman was hiding. Or maybe she was just terrified. Doreen hadn't even considered that. Maybe just the look of a crazy Doreen driving with a parrot on her shoulder was enough to scare Cecily into fleeing into the most public place she could find. And sure enough, a hard pounding came on her window. She rolled it down and went to speak, but Muggs and Thaddeus and even Goliath hollered at Mac as he glared down at her. The force of the din set him back in surprise. But not for long. He leaned forward again and asked, "Can you keep the menagerie quiet?" She snorted. "Not likely." But they calmed in spite of her words. "Besides, shouldn't you be chasing after her instead of talking to me? Other cops are on that. I wanted to make sure I had a talk with you first." He bit the words off as if he were seriously pissed. "If we weren't in a public place, I could choke you for what you just did." "What did I do?" she asked innocently. "You spooked her," he said. "I was trying to keep back and see where she went." "Oh. Well, I was too," she said. "But then I figured Thaddeus must have spooked her. But more likely it was you honking at me. Hardly being subtle, were you?" Mac shot her a hard look. "Thaddeus." She shrugged. "He looks kind of freaky when he's leaning forward like that. Every time I tried to pull over or to stop following her, the animals went crazy. This time, his expression looked like she was pulling his leg. Honest. You saw me pull off on the side of the road once, right?" He nodded. "The animals went crazy, absolutely ape-shit crazy," she snapped. "It's not my fault that right now they look like sweet and innocent critters." And they did. They were all just sitting, watching the exchange between the two of them. And then Thaddeus hopped onto the open driver's side window, looked up at Mac and said, "Hi, Mac." Mac stared down at him. "Wow. Hi, Thaddeus." Since when did you learn to say hi? Hi. 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 Doreen groaned. Don't encourage him, please. But Mac wasn't looking at her. So Thaddeus, if? And then Thaddeus walked up Mac's arm to his shoulder. Just when she thought he would stop there, he hopped over to the roof of the woman's car and slid down to the trunk. Doreen opened her car door. Thaddeus, get off of there. She was petrified his talons would scratch the paint job, and she'd be sued for damages. But Thaddeus just walked around in a circle, on top of the trunk. And then he chanted, body in the trunk. Body in the trunk. Mac groaned. Doreen gasped. Several people en route to their vehicles stopped and stared. She held her hands palms up. He's just a crazy bird. But a crowd had collected. Mac, I don't know what to do. Well, you started this, he groaned. He reached over toward the bird. Come on, Thaddeus. Let's get back in the car, buddy. Let's get you home. But Thaddeus evaded his grasp. Open trunk. Open trunk. Open trunk, he cried out. And when she wasn't looking, Goliath jumped out of the window and landed on the roof of the red car, right beside Thaddeus. Now 2 of her animals were loose that she had to contend with. But Goliath stood on the trunk, his tail twitching hard. Muggs, not to be left out, pushed open the door she hadn't quite clicked shut and raced around the vehicle, barking like crazy. Suddenly 2 more cop cars pulled up beside them. Doreen covered her face with her hands. One of the officers got out and said, Ma'am, are these your animals? She nodded. Yes. I'm so sorry. They're very much out of control right now. And then Mac stepped up. Hey, Stanley. Mac? With a long sigh, Mac said, Yep, that's me. They looked at the animals, looked over at her, and a big grin cracked Stanley's face as he asked Doreen, So what did you do? Catch another dead body? Again, Thaddeus chanted, Body in the trunk. Body in the trunk. Body in the trunk. Silence settled over the crowd. Stanley said, Is that what we're thinking is going on here? Mac shook his head. Honestly, I have no clue. There's just something about this bird. Actually, the cat and the dog too. Obviously something's attracting them. Maybe a scent. Well now, do we know who owns the vehicle? Cecily does, somebody in the crowd said. She runs the family planning center. From the background were all kinds of suggestions on what could be in the trunk. Maybe she's in there dead. Maybe there's a dead child in there. Somebody else said, Hey, maybe it's a cat. Maybe it's just something else that's been left close to the vehicle, and that's what they're smelling. Just because the bird talks doesn't mean he makes sense. She snorted at that. You've got that right, she said.